Now, we are not self-sufficient in everything. I will say that. We're only self-sufficient in a few things. However, we'd be able to eat with those few things. So I will run through a list of everything that my family is self-sufficient in. I have it all written down here. And the things that we are going to be self-sufficient in soon, the things that we've already planned for, and our long-term goals of how we're going to be self-sufficient in everything that we eat. I have an entire list here of everything that we eat on a regular basis and our plan to either become self-sufficient in them or what we're gonna do instead. Let's go. Hey there, welcome back to Mini Urban Farm, a channel about gardening and homesteading in the suburbs. If you're new here, this channel is all about growing your own food and raising your own animals for meat, for eggs, that sort of thing, learning to be more self-sufficient in small spaces, even if you don't have acres and acres to play around with. So if that sounds like something you're interested, don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more content just like this. So a couple of days ago, I was doing our online grocery order. We order groceries online now, since we work from home and all of that. So I was putting things into the virtual cart and a lot of things were out of stock. Blueberries, grapes, tomatoes, chicken was out of stock. And the one little pack of chicken that I did manage to find was about $4 more expensive than I would normally spend on chicken. Now, this is not a great feeling if you go to the grocery store and they're completely out of food. What do you do? In my case, I know that my family would be able to survive if the grocery store had absolutely no food. We might not like eating the same thing day in and day out, but my family would have food for the long haul. Because of that experience, I've decided to do this video outlining how we are setting ourselves up for self-sufficiency in the long term and giving you ideas as to what you can do to do the same thing. Now, we are not self-sufficient in everything. I will say that. We're only self-sufficient in a few things. However, we'd be able to eat with those few things. So I will run through a list of everything that my family is self-sufficient in. I have it all written down here. And the things that we are going to be self-sufficient in soon, the things that we've already planned for, and our long-term goals of how we're going to be self-sufficient in everything that we eat. I have an entire list here of everything that we eat on a regular basis and our plan to either become self-sufficient in them or what we're gonna do instead. Now, we currently live in a community. For anybody who has not joined this channel before, who has not seen our videos, we bought a 2-acre piece of land and we're working on building our dream home over there. But in the meantime, we are staying with family and we have a small garden. We do have some animals out on that other property and we do kind of a mix of, sharing our time between here and raising our animals over there. So our first things that we are self-sufficient in is eggs. We have a total of 13 chickens, 11 hens, and 2 roosters that we have for only eggs. Now, out of those eggs, we get about 9 eggs, 10 eggs a day, depending on the season. Of course, when there's more light, you get more eggs. But on average, we get 9 eggs a day. So that's a pretty good amount of eggs for us, and we're able to not buy eggs from the grocery store at all. Our chickens provide eggs for us to eat, right? To cook, to bake, just to eat eggs, that sort of thing. But we also take those eggs and we incubate them. So last year for the first time, we did get an incubator, and since then we have had numerous hatches where we hatch out the eggs from our egg-laying chickens, right? So not only do we use those chickens to actually eat those eggs, but we set aside a few of them, right? Maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and we incubate them, and out of those chickens, we either replenish our flock or we go ahead and raise them for meat purposes. So out of those chickens, our flock of 13 chickens, we have both meat and we have eggs that we are self-sufficient in. So we are slowly working our way towards not having to buy chicken at the store. We currently have chicken in the freezer from our own meat chicken flock, right? The ones that we butchered out previously, but we also still do buy chicken at the store depending on what type of cut it is or whatever. So in the future now, currently in the next few months or so, we're gonna be completely self-sufficient in chicken, but we're currently self-sufficient in eggs. The next thing that we're self-sufficient in is salad greens. So throughout the year here, all throughout the year, we grow salad greens. It definitely changes depending on the temperature and what time of year it is, because we are in Central Florida, zone 9B. So when it is 90 and 100 degrees outside, it's a little bit more difficult to grow salad greens, but on average, we choose varieties that are heat resistant. So we're able to grow them throughout the entire year. Now, at the end of the season, when I rip out everything from the garden, those are annual plants, so they come out with the entire garden, and then I blanch them and I freeze them, and we have a salad green mix in the in the freezer so that I can incorporate them into other dishes instead of just having a salad. But the majority of the year, we go out and we pick fresh salad greens directly from the garden without having to preserve them or anything. So that is number 2 in things that we are self-sufficient in. And I also want to add in on the salad green note that we only grow 2 or 3 varieties of salad greens. I don't really grow lettuce all that much. So we grow mustard, we grow kale, arugula, and sometimes we grow Swiss chard. But the majority of that is in a very small space. So we grow maybe 6 or 7 square feet of salad greens depending on the season, and we're able to feed our entire family with just that small section of salad greens. So that is a very quick turnaround time. If you've never grown salad greens or if you don't have enough to feed your family currently, that is one of the easiest things to get self-sufficient in because it only takes about 30 days to go from seed to actual harvest. All right, the next thing is tomatoes. We are self-sufficient in tomatoes. We do not buy tomatoes from the grocery store. So we grow the 2 different types of tomatoes, which are of course indeterminate and determinate tomatoes. Our determinate tomatoes are usually for preserving. I do a lot of freezing them into tomato sauce, right? So I will take all my Roma tomatoes, I will harvest them all at once, and I will cook them into a pasta sauce and put them in the freezer and continue using that as the season goes on, and then just doing that over and over again. Now for our indeterminate tomatoes, usually we eat those fresh because we have a supply of them throughout the majority of the year. The only time that they don't really grow as much is in the summer months, but they still are producing well into June and then pick back up in August or September. So we do a lot of eating those ones fresh, but I also do a lot of tomato confit. And that way we have them for the entire year. But tomatoes we don't really have to ever buy from the store because we have them and we are continuously growing them and preserving them. The next thing that we are self-sufficient in, and is actually really easy to be self-sufficient in, is herbs. So we grow a ton of herbs here and they take up a very small amount of space. We have rosemary growing in the front yard, right? It's 2 giant pots. We got them from, I think, Home Depot's or Lowe's, the pots. And then I had originally a small rosemary plant that I took some cuttings from and I rooted those, and now those are 2 very, very, very large rosemary bushes in the front of the house. We don't water them or anything, and they grow rosemary year round. And we have dried rosemary, fresh rosemary. I mean, we use rosemary a ton. The other thing is parsley. So parsley grows ridiculously fast and it keeps coming back up season after season, even if you pull it out of the garden. So we are self-sufficient in parsley, and we continuously dry it and freeze it into herb bombs and that sort of thing. And the same thing with mint and oregano and thyme. Those sort of things grow really fast and you actually have to contain them because they are quite invasive. But if you want to be self-sufficient in herbs, it's really easy. You just go to the garden store and pick up a few different little pots. For under 20 bucks, you can get an entire collection of herbs and just be self-sufficient because they will continue to grow and grow without you actually having to water them or do anything for the most part. Which means that we are also self-sufficient in tea. So any teas that I make are usually off of the rosemary plants or the mint plants or things like that. Sometimes I'll buy green tea, but really we're self-sufficient in tea because I can just use my herbs and make herbal teas. Next up is fertilizer. So this was definitely a very new one for us. We recently got some worms. So we are now in the habit of making worm tea, fertilizer, worm castings tea, right? Which basically you take worm castings that our worms produce. We have a tiny little box and those worms live in there. We continuously provide them with food scraps, eggshells, parsley, that sort of thing. When I'm cleaning out the garden, I throw some in there as well. And then the worms just do their job and they produce compost essentially, so that you can brew it into worm tea and you have then you have an abundance of fertilizer that you don't have to pay for. Now, fertilizer is something that I am very, very happy to be self-sufficient in because I don't know if you've been to the store recently, the garden store. Fertilizer is very, very expensive. And so if you have a large garden, and we actually have a whole bunch of fruit trees now, fertilizer can add up pretty quick. So being self-sufficient in fertilizer is basically setting your garden or your food forest or whatever it is, setting up all your plants for success and not having to rely on the store to do that. And lastly, we are also self-sufficient in rainwater. So off of our chicken coop, we actually have a 55-gallon barrel with a a harvesting system, which is essentially just a rain gutter, and it funnels in through like a mesh and into that rain barrel for our chickens. That means that our chickens are ensured a plentiful amount of water throughout the year. It rains a good majority of the time here in Florida. Usually there's no shortage of rain. So our chickens are able to survive without us having to continuously truck water out to them. There's no water on the property. We don't have a well yet. We will eventually, but right now we don't. So our chickens are able to survive, and if we needed to harvest rainwater for any other thing, to, to water the garden or other animals or whatever the case is, we have a supply of rainwater. Now, the other things that we have in the works but we're currently not actually self-sufficient in, I have a list of them here, and the first one being fruits. So we have, I think it's maybe like 15 fruit trees now that we have planted out, some of which have actually begun flowering and budding and producing fruit, but we haven't actually been able to harvest them yet. So with those fruit trees, some of which won't actually fruit for the next couple of years because they are still young, we have the plan in place, motion going forward to become self-sufficient in fruits, things like peaches and guava and guanabana and mangoes and things like that that we don't have to buy from the grocery store once they start producing. But as of right now, we are still buying those things from the grocery store. The same thing is true with quail. So we have quail. We have actually had quail twice now, and the first time around we had a very good learning experience with some predators, and so now our second time around with quail, we have actually gotten a whole bunch of eggs from those quail. Now, the long-term plan is to incubate those eggs just like we do our chicken eggs, get more little baby quail, and be able to either eat those quail or more realistically provide those as dog food for Milo, our giant dog. So moving forward, we will have another meat source, another supply of food if we need it. And then lastly, things that are currently in the garden that we have planted an excess of. Things like green beans and cucumbers, which I have planted out extra of this season so I can actually preserve them and just ensure that we have stuff in the freezer if we need it at any point in time. So those things are currently in the works, but I haven't been able to harvest them yet since it is still the beginning of the season. All right, so now on to the fun part. I have here an entire list of the majority of things that we eat, right? I tried to think of everything that we have on a regular basis, all the ingredients that I need in order to cook with and prepare food that's not just bland tasting and just eating eggs and omelets the entire year. So I have everything that my family uses on a regular basis and how we're going to accomplish either becoming self-sufficient in those items, alternative ways to make these items that we can be self-sufficient in, or a local source, finding some sort of other way to get these things besides the grocery store. So I'm going to walk you through this entire list, and then I will tell you the plan for each one of those. And at the end of them, I'm going to actually give you some tips that I have found that are very useful for making our way towards self-sufficiency. All right, so the first one is eggs again. We use a whole bunch of eggs. I use eggs to cook with nonstop, and we eat a lot of eggs. They are very healthy, and we also feed eggs to the dog. So that also accounts for a good portion of Milo's dog food, which saves money from having to buy it at the store. So we currently have two sources of eggs. We have both chicken and quail eggs, both on our property, something that we don't have to worry about. The second one is milk. We drink an exuberant amount of milk in my family. So we don't currently have anything that gives us milk, right? So our plan for milk moving forward is to get dairy goats. Now, this is not going to be a in the next 2 months kind of plan. This is going to be once we have our property and our home is built. We will be able to put up fences for goats and build a goat shed and that kind of thing. But our long-term plan is to be able to be self-sufficient in dairy, right? So that's things like milk and yogurt and cheese and heavy cream and that sort of thing, so that we can actually not have to rely on the grocery store for those. So that's our long-term goal. In the next 2 years or so, we should be able to be more self-sufficient in milk. But for right now, our goal, which we've started working on, is to find a local source from maybe a local dairy farm or something around the area that we can actually purchase milk directly from. All right, so another thing that we eat a ton of is pasta and bread and those kind of products, right? So we make muffins and we make quick breads and things like that. So we have started dabbling in a little bit of like a sourdough kind of bread. We do have a bread maker, so we don't usually buy bread from the store, and I usually don't buy pasta from the store. I make homemade pasta on a regular basis. A lot of gnocchi also, so like potatoes that we can grow ourselves, and that way we can supplement the flour needed for pasta. So definitely exploring alternative breads and pastas and that sort of thing is definitely on our list, and we've already started doing that. Also buying things in bulk, so not from the grocery store, but buying like online suppliers, just getting things in bulk, baking supplies, that sort of thing. And then also maybe eventually when we have the food forest up and running, growing some grains, right? So we can grow corn for cornbread. We can grow amaranth for grains. We can grow quinoa, things like that. And those will actually be able to replace some of the flours that we use and will be more self-sufficient in that. All right, so before we get into the animal portion of it, I also want to add in here herbs, right? Because we are self-sufficient in herbs for the most part. We don't really buy any herbs that we don't grow. But in the long term, when we have more space, I will be growing significantly more herbs and maybe even some actual tea plants to grow out for tea. So that is something that, you know, I would like to actually use for pest control, as well as being able to use them for culinary purposes. But I think that herbs are definitely going to be wildly expanded when we have more space. The same thing goes for sugar, right? So we don't use a ton of sugar for the most part. We try to stay away from processed sugar as much as possible, and we also don't use a lot of actual sugar. Like we don't have sugar in our coffee. When I'm baking things, I try to replace sugar with honey or other things like that. But another thing that you can grow is stevia, right? And stevia is a natural sweetener. So you can use that to sweeten things. And then also honey. Honey is one thing that in the next year or so, we plan to be self-sufficient in. Beekeeping has been on my list of things to get into for several years now and to do more research on, but we would like to have a hive not only to get the honey, but also to pollinate the garden that we're gonna have on our new property and to pollinate the fruit trees and that sort of thing. So honey is definitely something on our list to be self-sufficient in the next year or so. All right, so the last category of things on this list is animals, right? We raise animals for food. We're not vegetarian and we choose to eat meat. So currently we are self-sufficient in chicken as of July or so when we process out the next batch of meat chickens, but we have quite a few chickens going into the freezer, and then we will be incubating more around that same time to hatch out for more meat chickens. So that is one thing off of our list. We already have that in place and we are good to go on chicken after July. The next thing would be adding in more animals, right? So we have quail, but quail is not, in my opinion, right? I like quail, but it is a lot of work to harvest. It is a lot of work to process one quail and you don't get that much meat. So quail will more than likely stay on our homestead, but for dog food, right? Milo, our dog, is able to eat that and it would be a very good quick turnaround time to produce, you know, a good portion of his dog food in addition to some other things. So that one is going to stay as well. The next thing that we are going to be adding is ducks. So ducks have a very quick turnaround time as far as processing goes. They can be harvested between 8 and 12 weeks at least for Peking ducks, which is the type of duck that we will be getting. And they don't require too much that's different than chickens. So we will be adding in an additional pen and trying to build a small pond or some sort of water so that they can, you know, have a water source. But duck is a really good alternative to not having to eat chicken all the time, and they have a much faster processing time since we use heritage chickens instead of meat chickens. So our chickens take about 5 or 6 months to grow out, but ducks take only 2 to 3 months. Next is goats, right? We don't usually eat goat, but you can eat goat. I have eaten goat. I don't mind eating goat. We will have to work our way up to processing goat. However, if we're going to have dairy goats, and dairy goats can only produce milk if they are, you know, bred. So we will then have little baby goats. So what to do with little baby goats? You can either sell them or eat them or keep them as pets. But essentially, we're not going to have 20 little baby goats running around for no other purpose. So that's an option in the future. I don't know if we're actually going to use them as meat goats, but we can if we need to. Now, another thing that we eat a lot of is lamb, and we do have space for a few lambs in that area that we've designated for the animals. So we will be adding in lambs. For right now, we are looking for alternative sources for both lamb, pork, and beef. Right? I don't think that we are ever going to get into the business of raising cows or cattle or whatever you want to call it. I just don't think that that's something that we are called to do. We don't really have enough space to do that, but I don't think that we want to either. So we are looking for a local source of beef. and the same thing as pork. For right now, we are not planning on raising pigs in the next few years. We're going to start with goats and lambs and then eventually work our way up to pigs, depending on how those other things go, if we have enough space for it. So pork is on our list, but for right now, those are things that we are looking for local sources on. We have managed to find a few things that we're looking into, but right now we are still getting that from the grocery store. Alright, so if you are not currently self-sufficient in any of these things, or you're self-sufficient in only a few of them like us, I would recommend doing the same thing that I've gone ahead and done, which is to break down everything that your family eats on a regular basis and try to start off with the easiest ones, pick out the things that don't take that much time to become self-sufficient in, and then work your way up from there. One of the ways that we are going to be able to become self-sufficient in the long term is by having our incubator. So we have our incubator. I think the incubator I have cost me about $150. This was back last year. And so since then, we have hatched out over 100 chickens, little baby chicks, out of that incubator. And we've also hatched out quail. So that is something that is an investment, of course. I wouldn't really leave it up to our chicken flock to hatch out their own chicks. It's not really as sustainable, it's not really as secure as getting your own incubator and hatching out and learning that process, but that is something that is going to be essential in being able to raise food for our family. The same thing when it comes to seed saving, right? So if you are depending on the seed company every year to get your seeds, every season you go and you pick out the seeds you want and you order them, that is the same thing as depending on the grocery store. And in the past year or two, I know a lot of people have gone to order seeds, myself included, and a lot of things are already out of stock. So you don't want to depend on the seed store or the grocery store or any other place to buy seeds that you need. So out of the things that we are growing in our garden, my goal this season is to seed save as many things as possible. I did seed save quite a few things last season, but my goal is to increase it so that I don't have to buy those seeds over and over again. I can simply grow them out and continue to seed save for future. Now, the majority of these items take a lot of time and preparation, right? You can't just go buy something at the store and then all of a sudden you're self-sufficient. You're gonna have to give it time and a lot of effort to become self-sufficient in the majority of these things. As I know that a lot of you have already noticed, the grocery store is not as reliable as maybe we thought it was 5 or 10 years ago. The supply chain, the food chain, whatever it is you want to call it, without getting into any politics, it's not as secure as we would like to think. So becoming self-sufficient in at least a few things so that if you go to the store and they don't have anything, you have something to eat. You might not like eating the same thing every single day, but at least you have something that you're able to eat and say, I can be self-sufficient in this thing. That's my recommendation. That is what we are doing, and we are going to continue to do that in the coming months, the coming years, and even long term, just to ensure that we have a food supply when the grocery store doesn't. If that sounds like something that you are interested in continuing to share on that journey with us, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.